On July 14, 1518, within the Holy Roman Empire's city of Strasbourg, a woman identified as Frau Treffia stepped into the street and began a rhythmic, silent convulsion that would persist for 6 days. This was the ignition point of the dancing plague, a lethal episode of choreomania. Devoid of music or joy, she danced until her feet bled and exhaustion caused her to collapse, only to resume immediately upon waking. The pathology spread with viral aggression. Within 1 week, 34 residents had joined the fugue state. Within a month, the number swelled to 400. Victims danced until their tendons tore and hearts failed, dying from strokes, dehydration, and sheer physical depletion in the public square. This event was not merely a historical curiosity, but a complex intersection of neurology and sociology. The Strasbourg population was primed by a perfect storm of environmental stresses, a succession of famine-inducing harvest failures, astronomical grain prices, and the novel terror of syphilis. In this analysis, we will deconstruct the mechanisms of mass psychogenic illness, contrasting it against the competing hypothesis of ergotism, poisoning by the Claviceps purpurea fungus found in rye. We aim to understand how a population, besieged by starvation and spiritual dread, collectively hallucinated a theological curse into a deadly physical reality. To understand the contagion's velocity, we must examine the biological reality of Strasbourg in 1517. A succession of severe frosts and hail destroyed local harvests, spiking grain prices and forcing the Alsatian peasantry to subside on rotting, non-nutritive reserves. Compounding this metabolic distress was the terrifying emergence of the French disease, syphilis. Unlike modern strains, the 16th century variation struck with virulent speed, covering victims in pustules and ravaging the central nervous system. This dual assault of starvation and immunological collapse kept the population in a state of chronic hyperarousal, priming the collective amygdala for a catastrophic psychological break. Initial historical pathology pointed toward a toxicological culprit, Claviceps purpurea. This parasitic mold thrives on damp rye and produces ergotamine, a potent alkaloid structurally similar to LSD-25. Ingestion causes ergotism, historically known as St. Anthony's fire, characterized by severe vasoconstriction, burning sensations in the extremities, and vivid hallucinations. Given the region's reliance on blighted rye bread, chemical intoxication initially appears to be a logical explanation for the erratic behavior observed in the marketplace. However, the kinematics of the 1518 event dismantle the ergotism hypothesis. Ergot poisoning invariably leads to gangrene and uncoordinated spastic convulsions, rendering sustained physical exertion impossible. The Strasbourg victims displayed stamina and rhythmic coordination, maintaining their movements for days without collapse, a physiological impossibility for subjects suffering from the necrotizing effects of ergotamine toxicity. We must therefore look beyond toxicology to the mechanics of belief. With the toxicological hypothesis of ergotism discarded, the etiology shifts decisively to mass psychogenic illness, a condition where extreme psychological distress manifests as physical pathology. In 16th century Alsace, this dissociation was strictly codified by the theological dread of Saint Vitus, a Sicilian martyr believed to inflict compulsive dancing upon the unfaithful. This was a conversion disorder operating on a cultural script. The afflicted were performing a subconscious ritual of atonement. The trance state allowed the starving population to dissociate from the trauma of famine, channeling their existential terror into a synchronized motor frenzy that precisely mimicked the iconography of the saint they feared. Faced with the escalating contagion, the Strasbourg Privy Council consulted guild physicians who erroneously diagnosed the outbreak as a natural imbalance of hot blood. Rejecting exorcism for humoral theory, they concluded the victims must simply sweat out the toxicity through continued exertion. This precipitated a fatal administrative error. The council cleared the grain market and horse market to serve as dedicated dance floors, even hiring professional pipers and drummers to maintain the rhythm. This sensory amplification acted as a vector for the contagion. The auditory drive and official sanction validated the delusion, signaling to the susceptible populace that the trance was the correct response to the crisis. The council's solution was a catastrophic application of humoral theory. They constructed a raised wooden platform at the horse market and commissioned professional musicians to play drums and pipes, reasoning that the victims needed to dance until they exhausted their hot blood. This inadvertently validated the delusion. The rhythmic driving beat did not cure the afflicted, it synchronized them, acting as a sonic carrier wave that transmitted the trance to healthy onlookers. As the death toll mounted, the magistrates realized they had poured oil on the fire and abruptly abandoned medicine for miracle. Admitting defeat, the city loaded the thrashing bodies onto wagons and hauled them 30 miles into the Vosges foothills to the grotto shrine of St. Vitus at Saverne. There, priests administered a ritual of profound psychological leverage. They fitted the dancers' battered, bloody feet with red shoes soaked in holy oil and placed small crosses in their hands. As they were led around the altar, the sensory shift from the chaotic square to the silent authority of the shrine finally shattered the hysterical loop. The red shoes served as a tangible seal of absolution, granting the mind permission to release the body. The pilgrimage to the shrine in the Vosges Mountains marked the decisive pivot from secular failure to theological resolution. Upon arrival at the grotto near Saverne, the afflicted were not treated with sedatives, but with specific sacramentals, small crosses and red shoes intended to appease St. Vitus. Priests guided the dancers in a ritual circumambulation of the wooden altar, a kinetic liturgy that validated their suffering while establishing a clear termination point for the curse. Unlike the open-ended dancing in the horse market, this ritual provided a spiritual off-ramp. The symptoms subsided almost immediately, not due to biological intervention, but because the sufferer's internal cultural scripts for absolution had been satisfied, effectively severing the psychogenic feedback loop. Ultimately, the Strasbourg outbreak stands as a clinical monument to the somatic lethality of extreme psychological stress. The mortality of 1518 was not driven by claviceps purpurea or viral encephalitis, but by a collective dissociation triggered by the convergence of famine, pious dread, and administrative malpractice. This event maps the terrifying capacity of the human nervous system to override basic survival instincts in favor of shared delusions. The dancing plague remains history's most potent case study of how a belief system, when pressurized by existential threat, can manifest as a contagious, fatal necrosis of the will.